Hello everyone, my name is Hilda Adur. I support with communications, monitoring and evaluation at Kobras. Kobras is a primary school located in Changwali refugee camp in Uganda and has been serving refugee children since 2009. At Kobras, and similar to the rest of the world, academic excellence is a key ingredient in the definition of high quality education. Kobras follows the Ugandan curriculum, and our aim is to ensure that refugee children in our school perform at a high level in their primary school and continue to excel in their secondary education once they leave the camp. However, our definition of quality goes beyond academic excellence. For us, it is also the influence on a child towards bringing social, economic, and physical change within their vicinity. Thanks to our focus on problem solving, our children are able to solve problems that adults may struggle with. For example, resolving conflicts and respecting their fellows, no matter what the circumstance, whether fear of stigmatization because they were rescued from marriage or are older for their class. We also provide opportunities for children to lead and serve. For example, we offered land to the children to set up nursery beds with the hope that they will take this to their homes and grow some vegetables and fruits in their kitchen gardens. And some of our children help our cooks serve meals to 800 children daily. Of course, offering this type of education costs money and would be highly unaffordable for a population that is already vulnerable and disadvantaged. To give you an idea, UNHCR provides refugee aid of $8.74 per person per month. And this has been reduced in the past year to $5.92. So you can imagine the dire need that these families live in. In fact, more than half of our school's total population cannot afford to stay in school because of requirements like scholastic materials, tuition and feeding costs, but we are determined to make it affordable to as many refugee children in the community as possible. In order to help make access radically affordable for our parents, we have adopted a community-based funding model where we allow families to pay in crops instead of cash if they don't have it. So a family that has a piece of land can bring kilos of maize or beans as tuition fees, and we use that as part of our meal plan. Currently, our feeding program costs $41,000 annually, and family contribution makes up 73% of that. Of course, this model does not cover our costs entirely, so we do rely heavily on fundraising as well to make up for the difference. But we are also proud to provide an opportunity for all the parents to invest in their children's education with what they have and reinforce a culture of community and collaboration, which has always been the source of survival for refugee populations. Community is also an inherent part of our model and culture as a school. And so this funding model is a method of affordability that is aligned with who we are and what we do.
Hi, I'm George Cowell, International Director at Rising Academies. When Jihad asked me to discuss the quality and affordability of education partnerships, my mind naturally went to my experiences in Liberia, where I spent 4 years working on the country's public-private partnership, now known as LEAP. I still work closely on the program today, but from Ghana, where I'm calling or doing this call. The Rising team in Liberia currently manages 95 schools in partnership with our ministry colleagues, supporting 20,000 students. LEAP was highly controversial when it started in 2016, perhaps the most controversial education project of recent times. The story begins almost 8 years ago. President Sirleaf famously called the education system a mess. She turned to one of her most successful reforming ministers, Honorable George K. Werner, to find some creative solutions. After a few years of listening, watching, and looking at different providers around the world, Minister Werner set the wheels in motion for Liberia's education PPP. It was to be a multi-operator program evaluated by a rigorous RCT to determine which providers could deliver results. The education world was divided. Following the 3 years evaluation, which ended in 2019, there's a story about LEAP that usually gets told. It says that the program improved learning outcomes, but there were large variations between the 7 different providers in terms of academic effectiveness, cost, and their impact on the welfare of students and teachers. That's part of the story, but it's not the whole story. And I want to tell you about some of the parts that have often been overlooked. And in doing so, touch on some of these important questions of quality and affordability that we're considering. Of the 7 providers that started the program, only 4 remain today. The 3 providers who left the program did so essentially because they didn't meet the ministry's benchmark of quality. This speaks powerfully to the ministry's ability to build a program that encourages innovation while still holding providers accountable for their performance. And yet, some saw the removal of providers as evidence of the program not working. What this misses is that the partnership was set up to be intentionally experimental. The ministry wanted different types of organizations with different educational models to find out what worked and what didn't. The ministers in Liberia will tell you that they learned a great deal, not just from the providers who were successful, but also from those who were not. So in thinking about quality as it relates to PPPs, direction is set by the ministry, enforced through a set of minimum expectations and carefully designed performance criteria. How providers then deliver on this is up to them. There's a certain amount of freedom granted to the providers. Interestingly, the expectations and performance criteria evolve throughout the duration of LEAP. In the 2nd year of the program, the government of Liberia changed, the first peaceful transition of power since 1944. Minister George Werner moved on, and it was assumed by many that the program would have an abrupt end, as is so often the case for development projects when a government changes. But the new ministry, led by Professor Dao Ansu Sonny, took time to tour the country, visit schools, and they determined that there was enough promise in the program for it to keep going. It was a very brave decision at the time. Over the coming 18 months, the new government carefully reformed the program, and while learning outcomes remained a central pillar of how the providers were evaluated, a broader set of benchmarks were introduced and the program was strengthened. I've always felt that the international community has failed to give the Ministry of Liberia the credit they deserve for this piece of work. When considering the quality of education partnerships, we often understandably start by looking at the provider's schools, but there are a broader set of considerations too. The LEAP program has undoubtedly improved the quality of Liberia's education ecosystem. There are a variety of examples of how LEAP has made changes that have rippled through the broader system so far, but the most obvious demonstration of this happened at the onset of COVID. In that moment of crisis, the ministry turned to LEAP providers to help mobilize resources quickly. It was a remarkable few weeks. Liberia delivered radio lessons nationally within 3 weeks of their first COVID case. This is much faster than many of their peers in neighboring and more developed countries. This happened because for 5 years, the ministry had worked hand in hand with private providers. There were pre-existing relationships, on-ramps for funding, high levels of trust, and a shared sense of responsibility and teamwork. Providers brought speed, innovation, and were able to mobilize resources at the national and community level rapidly. In those weeks and the months that followed, the lines between public and private were blurred in a very exciting and positive way. The gains from this set of relationships compound every day in the work we do now. So what about affordability, the other part of this conversation? Well, by the 3rd year of the program, Rising had a per student cost of $62 per student per year. If you're thinking $62 isn't very much, well, I'd say you were right. It's not. Liberia currently lies 5th from bottom in the World Bank's Human Capital Index and commits less than 3% of its budget towards education. So for LEAP to be sustainable, it had to drive down costs towards Liberia's target education expenditure. To some, it wasn't far enough, and the program has been criticized by international commentators again for being expensive. What this conclusion failed to consider, though, is the context of these results within Liberia and its history. LEAP delivered better results and more rigorously evaluated results on a larger scale and at a lower cost than any other evidenced education initiative in Liberia's post-war history. It also established a bigger and more vibrant education ecosystem, a new generation of highly committed and talented Liberian education leaders, and has armed the ministry with a host of insights and innovations that they can take into the broader education system. Life would have been much easier for the ministry without LEAP. It has caused many headaches along the way, but in my conversations with ministers today, they see it as a great investment. And that's important to think about when we think about program affordability. I want to finish by stealing a few paragraphs from our CEO, Paul Skidmore, who wrote about LEAP back in 2019. He said, turning a situation around like the crisis in Liberia's education system is not a sprint, it's a relay. It requires ministers who are bold enough to try things, as Minister Werner was in 2016, and ministers who are brave enough to look for good in what their opponents have done, to fix what's not working, and to build on what is, just as Professor Sunny did when he took over as minister in 2018. That's why programs like LEAP matter, not because they are a panacea, not because everything works the way it's supposed to, not because every provider does a good job, but because it shows that with political will to take risks, with the right commitment to rigorous evidence, with true government ownership of a program, and perhaps most importantly, with the right partners, change is possible.
Education forms the most critical part of any human's life because whatever goes in our minds determines the quality of our lives. I'm Oladipupo, co-founder at AFriLearn. When my co-founder and I struck out to build AFriLearn in 2019, we found it extremely disheartening that for most young Africans, quality education is largely inaccessible and unaffordable. For instance, Nigeria currently has over 200 million population base. Of this number, 80 million, that's 40%, can't read or write. 170 million, that's 85%, can't build or create anything meaningful. Let's face it, education systems across Africa are in crisis. And even if the government was to be super efficient, it couldn't catch up with the educational demands of young Africans. Having seen the repercussion of illiteracy across our communities, nation, and continent, we quickly resolved that technology presents the best opportunity for us to make quality education radically affordable. For us at AFriLearn, quality simply means delivering an excellent, fun learning experience that improves learning outcomes, liberates minds to think differently, and empowers young Africans to compete favorably with their counterparts globally. Radical affordability, on the other hand, means availing everyone access to inclusive, equitable, and high-quality education, irrespective of their status or circumstances. Few months after AFriLearn went live, the overwhelming feedback, growth numbers, and superior learning outcomes recorded signal that we are onto something revolutionary. To democratize quality education, AFriLearn integrates genius tutors, animators, and developers to provide curriculum-relevant video lessons, class notes, practice tests, live classes, and a personalized learning dashboard that empowers learners to study at their own unique pace in and outside the classroom on any device, anytime, and anywhere. We found that people learn differently. For instance, some children learn best by watching videos, some by reading, some by practicing problems, and some by collaboration. Based on this discovery, AFriLearn was uniquely designed to give every child the freedom to learn using the personalized learning method that works best for them, while helping them get ahead much faster. Every day, the AFriLearn studio hosts expert tutors who use storytelling methods to teach different topics across all subjects in front of cameras, covering the entire government-approved curriculum. These thousands of video lessons are then developed into engaging animation and deployed for users' subscription through our app, web, and data-free dongle services at highly affordable rates for primary and secondary school students ages 5 to 18 across Anglophone West Africa, a market of effectively over 300 million people. Using this approach, we are able to cut out the expensive cost of buildings, every teacher's recurring salary, administrative charges, and many others, while delivering high-quality education with superior learning outcomes, leveraging media and technology. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic and school closure across Nigeria, on April 5, 2020, AFRILEARN launched its class notes prototype, which instantly went viral, providing complete primary and secondary education content online. Combining our free content with a subscription fee of $2 per month, AFRILEARN has reached over 200,000 learners, gained over 7,000 registered users, and growing very fast. AFRILEARN has since been listed #1 basic education platform in Nigeria and looking forward to break even within 2 years. The global edtech market is projected to reach $404 billion by 2025, and AFRILEARN is well positioned to be a key catalyst fueling this growth across Africa. If we are sincere, most of our problems in Africa is tied to education. And if we do this right, our impact is going to be transgenerational. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Josh Hendrickson. I'm the former COO of the African Leadership Finance Company, a company which unlocked education finance for many ALU and ALX students via the use of income share agreements. And I've been asked to share a bit of my knowledge with you on the topic over the next 5 minutes or so. So I'll jump right in. I'm sure it's fairly obvious for this audience that there's a shortage of funding options for African students today. Government funding is limited. Private loans are difficult to get and have high interest rates when you can get them. Scholarships are only available to a select few, and paying for yourself is all too often unaffordable. And so one potential solution to this is income share agreements between the program and the student. So I want to take a few minutes to walk you through what is an income share agreement or an ISA. So ISAs have 3 specific characteristics. They charge a fixed percent of a student's future income rather than a fixed repayment amount. So in a typical student loan, you have to pay $100 a month no matter what you're earning. It might be completely unaffordable, but you still have to pay that specific amount. Instead, with an ISA, you're charged a percentage of your income. And then you repay for a fixed period of time. So it's typically, okay, your first 5 years after graduation, maybe 10 years, maybe 3 years, depending on the ISA, but you pay for that fixed period of time, and whatever you've paid in that time, it is now over. And then there's typically a maximum repayment cap. So that's typically 3 to 5 times the amount funded, so that nobody winds up paying, say, 100x what they were funded, which would be completely unsustainable. ISAs act like equity for the investor rather than debt. So it's as if the investor has equity in an individual rather than receiving debt repayments. And that's where that fixed percentage of future income comes in. So in this example, let's say a student is enrolled for 3 years and the investor pays a portion of that tuition. Upon graduation, the student pays a percentage of their income to that investor. And you typically find a minimum income threshold, so that if a student is making under a minimum income, or a graduate is making under a minimum amount of income, they wouldn't actually have to pay that investor during that time period. And altogether, this makes them ethical towards recipients. So it aligns incentives. If a student is successful, if the school is able to make the student prepared for the job market and they get a job, then that funder receives higher returns and can fund more students. They are forward-looking, so they don't look at a person's historical ability to repay a loan, but rather look at the projected future income of an individual. And they're always affordable. Given that they charge a fixed percentage of income, it ensures that the recipient can always afford the repayments, unlike a traditional student loan that has a fixed payment amount and which may become unaffordable. So income share agreements have already proven relatively successful globally in certain geographies with certain companies. There's a few that are operating on the continent. Some have been around for 15 or 16 years and have funded thousands of students. However, they're not perfect. So ISAs aren't for everyone. The best professions that funders want to fund are those that are going to earn a steady income upon graduation, that have clear job prospects and ideally earn a high salary. because then the funder gets a more money in return. So they're not great for funding entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs tend not to earn an income early on, and so maybe an investor wouldn't want to fund them. There's also a chance for misaligned incentives. So we just talked in the last slide about how ISAs align incentives, but if the ISA provider is a third party and not the education provider actually still has no incentive and is not held accountable for the success of that student. So ISAs work really well when the education provider is also the ISA provider, because that's when incentives are perfectly aligned between the education company and the student. And from my own experience with ALFC and feedback from customers, ISAs feel like a tax. So already a graduate is getting taxed on their income, and now you add another percentage on top of that, which would increase as they earn more. So I hope this has given you a little bit of insight into what income share agreements are, when they work well, and the fact that they're not perfect, they're not the panacea to solve this problem, but still do present a very interesting potential solution for the lack of funding for education on the continent.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Crook, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. I am a former teacher and school leader and co-founded and now support Metis as executive director. What do you think of when you think of scale? A hockey stick, 10x, 100x, expansive, rapid growth? Where did this notion come from anyways? Ancient empires? Modern day venture capitalists? Should we, as educators, really be replicating Silicon Valley values as we seek to provide an affordable and excellent education to all youth on the continent? I believe that we need to decolonize our concept of scale. I think that we need to imagine beyond the exponential growth of one institution and leverage the impact of scaling through sharing. Previous speakers have highlighted the explicit costs of providing education, such as teachers, facilities, and technology. But there's a hidden cost to developing and delivering quality education that many of us might not think about, which is the cost of building institutional knowledge. Networks can both reduce this cost and scale expertise and innovation across institutions. I can give you an example. Many of you know Dr. Utheri Karagu, the founder of Children in Freedom, East Africa's first Afrocentric school. And when she joined the fellowship that we run at Metis, school was just an idea. She had no experience building curriculum, hiring and training teachers, managing construction, but those gaps were bridged by the network of mentors and fellows in the Metis community who shared full curriculums, tips on launching the school, notes on government compliance, and support when the entrepreneurial journey inevitably got rocky. Networks can scale innovation across private, nonprofit, and government institutions. Influenced by her Metis peers at Dignitas and Big Picture Learning and by her mentor at Stir Education in India, Ruth Mugambi piloted professional learning communities during her fellowship time at Metis. And as the director of secondary education at KACD, Kenya's Institute for Curriculum Development, she has managed to incorporate her pilot and this approach to teacher professional development into national policy documents. Professional learning communities will be rolled out across the country in the coming years. So because of a powerful network, an evidence-based innovation spearheaded by nonprofits will now reach thousands of Kenyan government teachers. These examples highlight that we can affordably scale both knowledge and impact by supporting interinstitutional collaboration. Let's go back to Dr. Utheri. 2 years after the school's founding, we took a group of fellows to see and learn from the school and her journey. Everyone was amazed. Questions arose. What are your plans for scale? Will you impact not just 250 families, but 250,000? Yes. Answer. Will you expand the school, grow into a network, build a massive institution from Nakuru to Nairobi to Nigeria? Perhaps, but scaling through sharing could be a better pathway. Instead of thinking of scale as exponential growth, we can think about scale as the process of sharing knowledge, practices, and tools with others who are growing initiatives in diverse contexts. So here are some principles our Metis community can offer to help organizations share for scale. There are 4 C's: codify, connect, cross-pollinate, and chronicle. So firstly, codify. If you want to scale through through a collective approach, you have to be able to share what you do in an easily understandable way. So create that toolkit, write down your curriculum, reflect and document your approach. Secondly, connect. I could share a whole different talk on how to enable meaningful connection. We've learned that intentionally investing in relationships of trust, codifying community culture and caring for it, and enabling emergence are key practices for an impact-driven network. We can delve into that later. Please reach out to me. But for now, as you codify your work, don't do so in a corner. Connect with other individuals and institutions. Form communities locally and globally where you can learn, access support, and share. Thirdly, cross-pollinate. Now that you're out of your little silo, share, learn, adapt effective models to your context, and make sure that the tools, resources, curriculum, and tech that you've created are shared with others. And finally, chronicle. When you've achieved meaningful impact through a collective approach, shout it from the rooftops. Share the process and your impact. We can shape possibility through the stories we tell, the articles we write, the presentations we give. And I can be the first to admit that it's super tough to take a step back, particularly as practitioners, but it's essential we do so if we want to shift the global narrative and promulgate networks as viable and potent pathways for positive change. We have a little something for funders. Let's have a little huddle. To achieve the life-changing, continent-wide transformation you seek, we need to scale innovations and the information it takes to enable them. We need highly effective networks, and such networks take a lot of time and energy and love to cultivate. They need resources, so invest in them. Knowledge is costly. It takes significant financial and time resources to build new schools and tech and policies and programs. But we can build smarter and faster and stronger if we build together. If we share what we know, if we open source what we build, if we invest in the health of networks, we can decrease the cost of innovation and better serve our communities and the continent at large. Thank you.